Chapter 6. The weeks that followed were the most intense that I can remember. During the day, I helped Melania clean and organize the house. I worked in the studio and took care of the horse. At night, I crept up the attic stairs to meet with Donato. We were careful to whisper and make as little noise as possible, so as not to wake anyone sleeping below. I had taken some supplies from the studio, a pencil, some paper, a brush, and some paints, which Donato stored in the attic. By the light of the moon, when there was one, he showed me everything that he had learned from the maestro, as well as what he discovered within the walls of his prison about light, shadow, reflections, lines, and angles. In the mornings, I dragged through my chores, but despite my exhaustion, I was energized by my friendship with Donato and by everything he was teaching me. My father had sent me a letter at Christmas time saying that everyone at home was well and thinking of me, as well as a package with new clothes and some roasted chestnuts. I took the chestnuts up to the attic, where Donato and I celebrated the holiday on our own. For the first time since I'd arrived at the studio, I felt happy, though my happiness was always tempered by worry for Donato and a feeling of helplessness. But it wouldn't be long before something would happen to change the course of all our lives. "Boy," Melania yelled. She was in top form that morning. "Are you in love with the broom? You're asleep with her in your arms." Baldo and Piero laughed, and Marco looked me over from top to bottom, sneering. "What's going on out there?" the maestro thundered from the depths of his bedchamber. "Nothing's going on," Melania shot back. Then in a voice only we could hear, she added, "Drooling magpie, if you wanted to know what's going on, get out of bed and come see." He finally entered the studio that day after lunch. This was late, even for him. Baldo and I were preparing an egg yolk and vinegar adhesive, while Piero and Marco worked on their projects, when we all heard 3 loud knocks at the front door. Baldo and I looked at each other. Who could it be? Since I'd been there, Cosimo de Forli's house had had only 2 regular visitors, the cold and the local priest, and the priest came only in the mornings. "Melania, see who it is," bellowed the maestro from his seat by the fire. Yes, I'm going," she called from the kitchen. A moment later she was at the studio door. "There's a nobleman outside," she said excitedly. "What did you say? Who is it?" growled Cosimo. "A nobleman, with a lot of servants." I'd never seen Melania so nervous. The maestro stood up and, with Melania's help, slowly dragged his hunched figure down the hall. When they both disappeared behind the curtain that separated the entryway from the hallway, the 4 of us boys crept quietly after them and peered as best we could through a narrow opening in the curtain. The maestro looked through the peephole and then closed it with a bang. He straightened up, pushed back his hair with his hands, smoothed his robe, and opened the heavy door. There stood the noble Duke of Algora. I recognized him immediately. He was one of my father's best clients. I also recognized his woolen cloak, my father's work. "Greetings, maestro," said the Duke in a dignified tone. "How do you do?" "Very well, my lord," said Cosimo. "But come in, please. It is much too cold outside." The Duke made a small signal with his hand, and 2 of his servants helped him remove his cloak. He entered the room slowly, looking around impassively, as was to be expected of someone of his class. The thin, red-clad form of his secretary slid in behind him. The other men in his entourage stayed in the street by the luxurious coach in which the Duke had arrived. The maestro closed the door and offered the Duke one of the chairs at the table in the entryway. Then he sat down and ordered Melania to fetch an oil lamp. We jumped back from the curtain as she brushed past us. She was so nervous she forgot to order us all back to the studio. We resumed our positions at the curtain. "Dear maestro," began the nobleman, "I would like to know if there is time in your schedule to undertake a new project. If so, I have a commission for you." The maestro leaned on the edge of the table in order to stand up again. Melania glared at us before she entered the room with the lamp, which she set down next to the Duke. "My lord, I'm honored that you would come to me," said the maestro. The Duke smiled and removed his gloves. "How could I go elsewhere? Your marvelous allegory on freedom graces all the festivities in my grand ballroom." Allegory on freedom? Cosimo had painted an allegory on freedom? Cosimo de Forli, who kept his best student prisoner for being a better artist than he was? I felt my mouth fill with bile. This was my maestro, a man from whom I could learn only hypocrisy. "My daughter is marrying, dear maestro," the Duke continued. "Little Bianca?" said Cosimo with a wide smile. "Not so little any more," he laughed. "She's nearly 15 years old." "She's a lovely creature," the maestro gushed. "Yes, she's very lovely. But the palace chapel is a bit, how shall I say, a bit unlovely. Yes, that's the word. My lady and I thought that if the wall behind the altar were painted, it would be much more attractive." But of course, my lady the Duchess has exquisite taste. All of Florence is of that opinion. How would the maestro know what all of Florence thinks when he never leaves his dirty old house, I wondered. It was all false praise. We hope that you, Maestro Di Forli, will prepare a sketch of your ideas for the chapel wall painting. It will be a pleasure, my lord. I will draw and deliver it myself. The nobleman arose from his chair. He stretched his hand to his secretary, who handed him a small pouch. It jingled with coins. 40 ducats for your initial expenses, said the Duke, placing the pouch on the table. When you present the sketch, if it is to our liking, you will receive another such payment. We will then determine the balance of your fee for the actual painting, which will depend on the materials you need and the amount of work necessary to prepare the wall. Are you in agreement? Cosimo put his hand on the pouch. Thank you, my lord. You are always so generous. Both you and your distinguished wife will be satisfied. It will be my masterpiece, I can assure you. But one thing. Yes, the theme, my lord. What do you wish the painting to represent? That is up to your imagination, my dear maestro. You are the artist. The Duke and his secretary moved toward the door, which the maestro opened for them. Just outside, the Duke put on his cloak with the help of 2 servants. The wedding is to be in early summer, he said. I hope you will remember that your time is limited, maestro. Of course, do not worry, my lord. Cosimo closed the door, turned around, and pressed his hands to his stomach. From his expression, he seemed to be in great pain. Melania, he howled. God save me, exclaimed the servant. Build up the fire, it's freezing in this house, and make me some broth and hot wine. We hurried back to the studio. What's wrong with him? I asked Piero. Nothing, answered Piero in a thin voice. He has a commission. Arduino! The maestro's shout made my hair stand on end. Yes, maestro? Sharpen all the charcoals. Clean the brushes and the palettes. I want everything as good as new. Do you understand? Yes, maestro. And from that moment on, the whole house was in a frenzy. Melania worked in the kitchen and kept after us with a vengeance. I did whatever I was told, while Piero prepared the materials that would be used for the first sketch. Baldo cleaned the tables before putting down new sheets of paper. He took advantage of the confusion to go in and out of the kitchen, eating what he could find. Marco went through an enormous portfolio of drawings, separating the religious themes from the mythological and ornamental ones. The maestro had announced that the theme of the fresco would be the marriage of the Virgin. That night, I sat next to the barred window and described to Donato in detail everything that had happened that day. I wonder if he can handle this commission, I said. Why wouldn't he? He's done it many times before. But he gets so nervous, I explained. Besides, I think he's ill. Ill? Yes, I told you he'd been acting strangely these last few weeks, getting up late, the hot compresses, and all that. Today he could barely walk to the front door without Melania's help. Donato was silent. Then he sighed and rubbed his eyes. This will be your opportunity, Arduino. The painting in the Duke's chapel will be a fresco, a very complicated undertaking. Cosimo will need all the help he can get. I'm sure he'll have something for you to do. Of course he will. I'll get to break the eggs to make the base. Donato covered his mouth to stifle a laugh. Let me tell you about fresco painting. That night I began to learn the best way to prepare the walls and the way to trace the drawings with perforated paper, how to plan the work according to colors, how to shade with the color still partially wet, and how to keep the color from running. We talked all night until a half-dozen chirping sparrows signaled the onset of a new day. Only then did I make my way back down to my pallet, so Melania wouldn't miss me when she woke up.